All right, this third example here in section 7.4 is getting into adding fractions with unlike denominators. There's going to be two different methods here that you're going to do, and I'm going to show you the benefits to each one. Now, if you look at this, we've got two fractions we're going to add, and they have unlike denominators. So we've got 9x squared on the first and 3x squared plus 3x for the second. So let's go through how we add these. Now, if you remember from the journal that I showed you, the method that we looked at for adding rational expressions with unlike denominators had you just multiplying each term by the denominator of the other fraction. So here, to get your first term to get the same denominator, we just multiplied it by the second denominator over the second denominator, and same thing for the second. I'm going to make this a little clearer right here on what we were actually doing. So this had us actually multiplying by the denominator over the denominator, so times 3x squared plus 3x, and we were multiplying both the numerator and denominator, because when you multiply a fraction, you have to multiply both the top and bottom. So we were multiplying our first fraction by 3x squared plus 3 over 3x squared plus 3x. And we were doing the same thing for our second fraction. We were multiplying both the bottom and top by 9x squared over 9x squared. So what we're doing in order to get our denominators the same, we're multiplying the other one. We're multiplying our first fraction by our second denominator over our second denominator, and then we're multiplying our second fraction by our second denominator over our second denominator. So you see what we get here is we have our whole fraction over 3x squared plus 3x times 9x squared. That becomes our common denominator. And on top, we've got just the sum of our new numerators. We've got 7 times 3x squared plus 3x plus x times 9x squared. Okay, that's what we have here for the second term. I want to make sure everyone's clear on why we have that. So see 7 times this expression plus x times this term, and it's all over our common denominator. Okay, so that's our first method. We're just doing exactly what the journal said. We're getting our common denominator by just multiplying or cross-multiplying these two expressions. Okay, now once we get this, we need to go ahead and simplify. So let's go ahead and start doing that. We need to distribute and turn all these expressions into their simplified form. So we take 7, distribute it to 3x squared plus 3x. So we get 21x squared plus 21x. And then x times 9x squared gives us 9x cubed. And that's all over our common denominator. Now what we're doing is what we did in section 7.3. We're just simplifying this rational expression. So remember, you are not done adding or subtracting a fraction until you've gone through, combined like terms, and simplified everything. So let's see what we can do here. So we already know, let's take out some terms. So we know that on the bottom, 3x squared plus 3x, we can factor out a 3x, and that leaves us with x plus 1. And we can also take a 3x out of every term in the top. So when you take 3x out of all these, 3x out of 9x cubed, we're left with 3x squared. 3x out of 21x squared, we're left with 7x. 3x out of 21x, we're left with 7. So all we've done from this term to this is we've factored out a 3x. Again, since we've already done this in 7.3, we're kind of going through it quickly, so we're assuming that you know how to do these. So now we're left with 3x squared plus 7x plus 7 over 9x squared times x plus 1. Now let's go ahead and simplify, and let's see if there's anything left. So that is our simplified fraction right there. Okay, so that's method 1. We just simply multiplied each fraction by the denominator of the other one. So that comes in handy, but sometimes you're left with a lot of simplifying if this multiplication wasn't the least common denominator. So the other method is, let's first find the lowest common denominator, then add those together. Now, what that does is that makes sure that we are only turning our fraction into the lowest common denominator that we need it into to add them together. So what we need to do to find the least common denominator, and remember, that's just our least common multiple between each term. That's why we learned how to do the least common denominator, or the least common multiple, because that's exactly what the least common denominator is between two fractions. So the way we find that is, remember our steps from from the previous video, from video number 2. We factor each term, then write each factor to the highest power that appears in either denominator. So we just go through the steps from the last one. So let's remember, from our denominators here, our first denominator is 9x squared. So 9x squared is just 3 squared times x squared. And 3x squared plus 3x is just 3 to the first times x to the first times x plus 1. So our least common denominator, we've got 3 squared and 3 to the first. So 3 squared, which gives us the 9. We've got x squared and x to the first. So we've got x squared. And then we have x plus 1. So that gives us the x plus 1. So 9x squared times x plus 1 is the least common denominator. So what we need to do, so instead of multiplying by the denominator of our other term, we know that we need to turn each denominator into the LCD. Okay, remember this. All we need to do is turn our current denominator into the LCD, the least common denominator. So what we do here is we take our fraction and we figure out, what do we have to multiply each expression by to get this LCD. So let's go ahead and make sure that our current denominators are factored so we get a better idea of what work we need to do. So 9x squared is already factored. 3x squared plus 3x, we can turn that into 3x times x plus 1. Now, if we look at this, we want to figure out, what is this denominator missing to turn it into this? So what do we have to multiply 9x squared by to get 9x squared times x plus 1? Well, that's simple. All we have to do is multiply this by x plus 1. Okay, all we have to do is multiply our first fraction by x plus 1 over x plus 1 to get our LCD. Same thing for our second fraction. What do we need to multiply 3x times x plus 1 by to get our LCD? In this case, it's just 3x. So look at the difference here. The difference is that in our first method, we're just cross-multiplying. We're multiplying 9x squared by 3x squared plus 3x. That's a lot more than just multiplying by x plus 1. In our second fraction, we're multiplying 3x squared by 3x times 9x squared. That's a lot more than just 3x. What this method does is it allows us to find the least common amount of work. So what is the lowest number we can multiply our fractions by to get a common denominator. Okay, so let's look at what this looks like now. So we know that 9x squared times x plus 1 is going to get us our LCD. And remember, whenever you multiply a denominator, you also have to multiply the numerator by the same value. Same thing with our second fraction. We just need to multiply both the numerator and denominator by 3x. Okay, so again, this work right here, we figured this out by finding our least common denominator, or least common multiple. And that allowed us to find the LCD, which allowed us to find what work we have to do. Okay, so next we just go ahead and do this, and we end up getting 7x plus 7 on top and 3x squared on top of our second. We go ahead and we can multiply, or we can add, and both terms are already simplified here. We're in our least common denominator. Boom, we're done. So the benefit of this second is that it allows you to get your work simplified much faster. We had to do less simplifying when we multiplied by the LCD. In our top, we had to do a lot of simplifying once we did this multiplication. Now the benefit to the first method is that you don't have to do any work finding the LCD. Okay, so you multiply, you know exactly what you're multiplying by because it's just the other denominator, but you have to do a lot more simplification. So I like the second method because I think it's easier to find the LCD. Then you have simpler work. You don't have to simplify. The first method, it's not a lot of thinking up front, but then you just have to do a lot of simplifying. Sometimes that can be kind of tedious. So if we look at the second example, this one's pretty basic. So what I want you guys to do first is answer this question here. So I want you to find the sum of these two. So you're going to have to find the LCD, or either method. You're going to have to turn this into a common fraction and then add it. So I want you to go ahead and write that in the first question box that comes up. All right, now that you've answered that, what I want you guys to do is there's another question I want you to solve. So I want you to go ahead and solve number 7 right here. So I want you to go ahead and take number 7 and answer that in the next box that comes up. So go ahead and find the common denominator, or figure out how to combine these, and go ahead and write the solution to this in the second box.